Hello there. We continue in Genesis chapter 37 right to the end, 32 to the end. In the last session, the brothers of Joseph, after having sold Joseph to a bunch of Midianites or Ishmaelites, as they were also called, they decided to dip his coat in blood and then have it sent to their daddy to make him think that he was dead. Let's continue today, and we'll do verses 32 to the end and see what we can unpack. As I have done lately, I will just read the first verse because all the verses are mentioned in my commentary. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said, "This have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no." So, avoiding direct confrontation with Jacob, their father, again, they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "This have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or not." You see, the messengers were the ones that spoke for them. "We found this coat." In other words, Joseph's bloody coat was sent by messengers who claimed to have found the coat and needed Jacob to identify it, as if they didn't know. What a cruel thing for Jacob's sons to have him undergo. And it continues. And he knew it and said, "It is my son's coat." Now, looking back on the original Hebrew, it doesn't have "it" and it doesn't have "it is" inserted in there. And if you read the King James Bible, it is in italics. So basically, what we would have read if we read it completely translated from the transliterated, word for word from the original Hebrew, this would have read like this. And he knew and said, "My son's coat." You see, it doesn't take much imagination to picture his freely flowing, tear-filled eyes and hear his deep, heartfelt sobs. The garment was made so bloody that it caused Jacob to say, "An evil beast has devoured him." Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Blinded by grief, this was natural to conclude, especially from the bloody condition the coat was in and from the countryside to where he was sent by Jacob, which abounded by wild animals. Folks, don't you see what they did? He sent Joseph out to find them alone. And what they did was they dipped his garments in the blood, sending it back, so that Jacob could both blame himself for Joseph having been killed, and to make him think that Joseph was eaten by animals. Wow! Talk about cruel. I'll continue. Blinded by grief, this was natural to conclude, especially from the bloody condition the coat was in and from the countryside to where he was sent, where wild animals abounded in plenty. Therefore, there was no question in his mind. It was plain as day that Joseph was eaten. The worst case scenario was imagined in the midst of his grief, from the very depth of his being. Otherwise, if he would have examined the coat more thoroughly, he'd have to ask, where were the claw marks of the beast in that coat? Well, next we find that Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many, many days. See, as Reuben had torn his garments, so did Jacob. This was a common expression of grief and mourning in the ancient world of the patriarchs. He also mourned for his son many days. In fact, Jacob's grief probably lasted between 22 and 25 years, until the time he went down to Egypt and saw Joseph alive. In 22 years, the famine would start. Then when Jacob was finally taken down, could have taken any time between 23 and 25 years. Timeline isn't given. Oh, what a pitiful sight. What a pitiful sight it must have been when all his sons and all his daughters got together to try to comfort him. There, Dad. Oh, please, Dad, don't cry. But he refused to be comforted. Well, of course, Joseph was his true love son. But so was Benjamin. But Joseph was the one that died. Every time he saw Joseph, he must have reminded him of his beloved Rachel. He refused to be comforted. See, most commentaries discount Jacob as having any daughters beyond Dinah, because it says all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But you see, daughters were not commonly listed in genealogies. It's quite possible that his wives also gave him daughters. The only reason for mentioning Dinah is because she was the reason that the great Shechem slaughter took place. If you recall, and the cause of it was Dinah. Well, Dinah wasn't the cause of it. The cause of it was Shechem abusing Dinah, seducing her, raping her. Regardless, Jacob's whole family tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. To make sure they knew comforting, now, get this, to make sure they knew comforting him was a waste of time, Jacob said, "Nay, but I will go down to the grave to my son mourning." Now, in the Authorized King James Version, it says, "For I will go down to the grave to my son mourning." But in the Hebrew Jewish publication, Old Testament, it says, "Nay, but I will go down to the grave to my son mourning." It was clear that he would go mourning all his remaining days and years for his son. He made up his mind until he came to the grave, until he died. So it continues. Thus his father wept for him. Some commentaries aren't sure who the him was. Since the hymn is not very clear, this could have been read as Isaac weeping for Jacob's state of utter depth of despair. But I doubt it. It probably just meant Jacob's grief for his son, Joseph. Either way, it was an unbelievably sad time for Jacob's household. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. Now, officer in Hebrew is the same word used in other books of the Bible as eunuch. And you know what a eunuch is. Though it doesn't always signify that the man was neutered. A eunuch was a man that was neutered so that he wouldn't have any interest for either men or women. But in almost every usage of the word that is also rendered eunuch or officer, it represents someone who is in some high position of authority. Look at the eunuch that was in charge of Esther's harem. Look at the eunuch that was in charge of the boys, Daniel and his 3 friends. All of this. And even at that time, the Hebrew word for officer also meant eunuch. As far as the Justice Department of Egypt was concerned, captain of the guard was second in command only to Pharaoh. Now, how would that affect Joseph, the enslaved man of integrity? Would he still trust God after his being unimaginably mistreated even by his own brothers? If anyone could be justified in bitterness, it would have to be Joseph. But we shall see. He never did let what happens to him affect his relationship with God. My question to us is, how would we be?